Hey, welcome back to our channel. I'm Jared from 3C's Recreation. This is our Beta 200RR. This is a 2022 model. We are going to do a race wire harness and oil injection delete kit on this bike for you today. We just did a Kickstart kit, so if you're looking to know how to do that on your Beta 200, scroll down on our channel and check that out. That is why the pipe is still off of this, and I figured we'll leave the pipe off while we do this in case it's in the way. So the first thing I like to do when I do any sort of wiring, and obviously we're going to need to, is I'm going to remove all the plastics. So outside of the video right now, I'm going to take the headlight pod completely off. I'm going to take the gas tank and shrouds off, the seat, and the rear fender and the rear tail light. So I'm going to remove all of that, and then we'll come back and show you what we're going to do next. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the headlight. You get your brake line holder that comes down through, keeps it in place. It's just a Phillips screw in the back. The headlight, and then this is just like a running light in the bottom of the headlight there, this little bottom bulb. So that came off super easy. And this is what's behind here. I also took those wire ties off. They're nice, they're reusable. Beta has a really cool idea with these, so if you're on the trail you can move them around the bike if you need to. So that just exposes all of this. It's going to give us our display. All of this is coming off the bike. We're going to remove the front wheel speed sensor as well. We're no longer going to have any of this stuff. So no more brake sensors on both the front and then the rear brake sensor as well. I use a Banjo bolt. It's actually a Polaris part number. I will post that down in the description, the part number to the Polaris Banjo bolt if you're trying to do this at home. It's nice, you can save this sensor and re-thread in a right Banjo bolt without any of this on the end of it. And this whole left-hand block will be gone, no headlight, no turn signals, and we will be left with just the kill switch and the start button on the handlebar. That's all we're gonna have left on the handlebar. So we're gonna remove all of this all the way down through here. We're gonna cut this apart all the way down through. This is that oil injection tank that we're gonna take off. This is our rear tail light. This was dropped before I could unscrew our rear fender. So there were 6 bolts. This came down. I left it plugged in just to show you guys. And then this was all for like turn signals. If you lived in a state where you could do this, that's why the handlebar block is all there, and headlight and brake lights. So we're gonna remove all that because we're not gonna use it. And then if you come to this side of the bike, it just shows you ECU plug-in and the rest of the main harness there. So the first thing I'm gonna do is disconnect the battery. You wanna disconnect the negative, and we'll disconnect the positive as well. And then we can start unthreading this harness. And then that way we can dig this out. We're gonna have to split the top of the subframe so we can pull this oil injection container out. And then we have to split it again and tip the whole subframe up so we can get this boot out, because our oil injection kit, or oil injection removal kit, comes with a new boot. So that's what we're gonna have to tip the car back more to get this in there. So we now have the front portion of the wire harness removed, and it's easy to start at the front because you know that everything in this has to be disconnected because all of this is coming off. So when you're starting in the front, I've got the horn. This is my dual ignition map switch, and then all the rest of these, like rear brake lights, I guess this is the rear brake light, rear tail lights and whatnot. So the rest of this can now just get pushed out the front, and everything up front is now disconnected. So that's an easy way when you're doing the front of this harness to know what has to get disconnected. In a few minutes, we'll show you guys how, at the bottom, how to remove your wheel speed sensor. It's gonna go all the way down and screw into your brake caliper. So we'll show you guys that in a minute. But that's everything up on top. Now I can undo my handlebar switches. And like I said, this brake switch, we're gonna put a different Banjo bolt in. So this one's gonna hang here for a while until I get the Banjo bolts that I need. So I just filmed a bunch and I realized my audio wasn't working. My microphone that I use was not turned on. So that's cool. So I'll give you guys a rundown of what I just did. So we've got the new switches on the handlebars. We have the new starts button and kill switch. I showed you guys previously them coming off, the old style that is. And so we have the two new wires coming down through. This is the new slim down wire harness. We do not use the dual ignition map, and that's what's curled up in electrical tape, just taped back to the harness there. Here's where it's all plugged in the middle. And as you get down this way, this is where you notice our new ground wires have been connected from the new harness. Just make sure you connect your grounds. That's important. This is our starter wire coming up through. This is our ground to the battery. That was still on there. And like I mentioned previously, we're going to remove this. This is our brake sensor. I'm going to use a different Banjo bolt here and here. And then to remove your front brake rotor sensor, you just have to get it out of the connector here, come down through, loosen your caliper bolt, swing it back, and then inside of here is like a 10 or an 11 millimeter jam nut, and you'll just thread that out of there. So we're going to remove that as well. And as you see the harness come down through, these are your two stator wires. These were already on the bike. They connected into our new harness, and we threaded the harness nicely through to the ECU, to the starter relay. So everything is nice, tucked in, clean. And inside of here are the two, there were two connectors going to your oil injection. Those have been removed with the main harness. And so that wraps up the wire harness portion of this video. Oh, this is your TPS sensor that we're removing as well. That's what's next. So we're going to do oil injection removal. So we have to get rid of this line that's going into this boot, this sensor, and we got to get that tank out of there. So we're going to split this subframe apart so we can get that tank out. So the shop got super busy since I filmed the wire harness part, and in between customers I've been picking away at this. So what I've done is I've loosened the upper subframe, and what we've done is you have the upper subframe mount where it mounts to the main frame. You have the two oil tank bolts that let the oil tank drop down. On the top here, there were these plugs, one on each side. I pulled the plugs off, and down in here there were 10 millimeter bolts on both sides. So here's one right here to show you guys the length. And then up underneath, we had a 10 millimeter bolt. You can see the socket, or where it goes in right there. So we had one of those on each side. We dropped down. And then in the front, there were two spots where the oil tank would have been held on. You can maybe see up under here. We pulled the one out there. And then on this side, we had the same upper bolt we dropped down, the same front subframe bolt that we removed. And then we had these long ones on either side. So this one is going to come out. Here's that other little one that holds the front of it on. And then I'll go back to the other side to show you this one. It's the same exact bolt on the other side of the bike here. So this one was already loosened. So everything is now loose, and we can remove that upper subframe. So there's quite a few bolts. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 on this side, plus the other side. So keep that in mind when you're doing this. There's just going to be a ton of bolts. Now that everything is loose and ready for the oil tank to be removed, we got to get the oil line removed first. So you'll see right on these 200s, and I got the kicker in the way now because we just installed that. All we're going to do is just pull out on the oil line pretty hard to get it out of that fitting. So now the oil line is loose. I'm just going to unthread it. I'm going to just follow it backwards and push it through. That way whenever we pull the oil tank out, all this can come out with it. Another side note is I probably could have emptied this oil tank before we did this, but I'll dump it into the 2-stroke bin whenever we're done here. Now that the oil line is removed, we can tip this up, and that gives us room to pull this out the side here. So here's our oil tank coming out, and we're done with the oil injection tank. And we're going to drain it, that way the oil is not just resting inside this container. At this point, we can reassemble the upper subframe to the lower subframe. We can get all this back together, get all these bolts in, because we're now going to remove the bottom bolt and tip it up to finish the job. So we're going to take a minute and we're going to sandwich this back together, and then we can tip it up. So we have all of our bolts tight. Everything is retightened on the upper subframe. The only thing I left somewhat loose is the front because we need to pivot this still. So I didn't want to torque that and I didn't want to Loctite it yet. When we're done with this, we'll put some Loctite on there and retighten it. So in my job, this is a little bit easier because my exhaust has already been removed. In a normal world, if you weren't doing everything in the front that I was doing, you'd have to drop your muffler in the rear. So now you could tip this. So we unscrewed, these are 6mm hex head, the lower subframe bolt. And then the other side, you have your Phillips boot clamp for the carburetor right here. So we've already loosened that. And so now in theory, you should be able to tip this up and get this right out of the way. And there's really nothing to worry about pinching. The wires are pretty flexible up top here. So now this is all out of the way and we can get to the carb boot in the front here. At this point, the kit is pretty self-explanatory. We have our block off. We can take our TPS sensor out. If you look in this hole here, you can see it's got this funky head on the screw. They give you the Allen key to get that out, so we can use that. And then up here, we're gonna use a flathead screwdriver and remove the carburetor right off the boot. And then we have our 4 carb boots bolts, and we're gonna get those out. And then we can now remove that pipe holder for our oil injection line. We don't need to leave that loop on there anymore. So now I'm gonna change this out, and then I'll pop this apart and show you guys that. The new block off does not come with a little O-ring on the anodized part, so I just took the O-ring off of the main sensor. It has a little groove there. And I'm just going to throw that on here just to protect it. And we're going to throw a little bit of grease on here as well, and we'll reinstall this. Now that the TPS has been removed, we can pull the carburetor out of the way so we can get to the boot better. This is about as close as I can get that GoPro stand for you guys, so I apologize. But down in here in the corner, you'll see the tamper-proof screw that Beta installs kind of almost on everywhere in these bikes. We have a really cool kit that we picked up. It's got all the tamper-proof holes cut out, so we have the right one. So what we need to do is remove this tamper-proof and then the other 3 8mm bolts, and that'll let this come out, and you can see right there, that's what we're trying to remove, is this boot that has the oil injection line in it. So we're gonna take this apart. So we just took the last screw out, and this is the old boot that we're going to remove. They give me a new gasket for the inside of the V-Force reed, but we're not even going to take it off. It's still on there nicely. There's no reason to pry it off just to put this back on. That gasket's not very old. This bike's only got 500 miles on it. So we can now remove these. We'll hold on to these, and we're going to need to save our clamp here, and we're going to slide this on the new car boot. And you can see this boot does not have the drilled out insert for the oil injection line. A lot of us will now take this opportunity to get rid of that tamper-proof screw and just replace it with a stock 8mm to match the other ones. And this is the third one originally that had that oil injection holder on it. We can remove that, and we can just reinsert these 4 screws back into the car boot and reinstall it. With your carb boot now tight, we can reinstall the carburetor, and you'll notice that there's a notch in the middle of the top of this carburetor, and there's a notch in the middle of the carb boot. That's to keep your carb straight up and down. So when you reinstall this, make sure it's straight in like it should be. And now before you tighten, it's a good opportunity to get your vent lines back down through the bracket that's installed on the bike. We'll get those run down like they should be at the same time. That way you're not fighting those later on. With the rear clamp now tightened, we can reinstall our lower subframe bolt, Loctite that, and we can take these back out and Loctite them because we're now done tipping this. Thanks for following along. This was Jared from 3C's Recreation. We just finished the race harness kit and the oil injection delete. Before we go any further, we're going to go outside and wash this bike. So thanks for watching and stay tuned for more.